The sun had not yet cleared the jagged rim of the desert when the people of Silver Mesa began to gather. A dusty wind moved through the empty street, carrying the smell of creosote and fear. The gallows stood tall in front of the courthouse, a black shape against a pale sky. A single rope hung there, freshly knotted, swaying faintly. Beneath it stood a man who neither trembled nor prayed. His name was Taza Blackhawk, an Apache warrior with wrists bound in iron and a calmness that unnerved everyone watching. His face was cut from stone, dark eyes fixed on the horizon as if even death could not break his pride. A bruise marred his jaw, a testament to the beating he had taken when he'd been captured, but he refused to bow his head. To the people of Silver Mesa, he was a murderer, the savage who had killed their sheriff during a raid 2 weeks ago. Behind the gallows, a crowd pressed close, ranchers, shopkeepers, and women in calico dresses clutching their children. They spoke in low, bitter voices. Some called for a quick hanging. Others whispered about the Apache's calm, how unnatural it was, how it made them uneasy. At the edge of the gathering stood Evelyn Carter, the sheriff's widow. Her black mourning dress clung to her in the dry morning wind, her face veiled but pale beneath the lace. Her husband's badge, now dull and scratched, rested in her gloved hand. She hadn't spoken much since the night of his death. People pitied her, saying she'd gone cold inside, too calm, too quiet. But Evelyn's calm was not peace. It was a cage around a storm. For nights she had lain awake, haunted not by her husband's death, but by the questions surrounding it. There had been whispers of debts, of secret meetings with smugglers, of something unholy buried beneath his good name. Yet the town had buried him as a hero, built a monument at his grave, and now demanded blood in his name. The judge, red-faced and sweating in the morning heat, stepped onto the platform. By order of Silver Mesa, he declared, this man is sentenced to hang for the murder of Sheriff John Carter. The hangman adjusted the noose. The crowd hushed. Taza lifted his chin. I killed no lawman, he said, his voice low but steady. Only the man who burned my home. A murmur ran through the crowd. The judge barked for silence, but the words had already taken root. Evelyn felt her stomach twist. Her husband's watch still hung heavy around her neck. It had been found at the scene of the raid. She had told herself the Apache must have stolen it. Now she wasn't so sure. Enough, the judge thundered. Justice will be served. The hangman reached for the lever. Evelyn's pulse pounded in her ears. She looked up at Taza, at the calm in his face, the dignity that refused to die, and something in her broke. Stop, she cried, her voice slicing through the crowd like a whip. All eyes turned to her. She stepped forward, trembling but resolute. By the old frontier law, she said, her voice gaining strength, a condemned man may be spared if claimed by a widow as husband. I claim him. The square fell into stunned silence. The judge gaped. The hangman froze mid-motion. Someone in the crowd laughed nervously, thinking she had gone mad. Evelyn pulled off her veil. I'll marry him, she said clearly, her face pale but eyes fierce. In my husband's name I will bind this man to my house. Let God decide the rest. The judge sputtered, but the law was ancient and binding, written when the frontier was wild and men were few. No one dared dispute it openly. Taza looked at her, the faintest flicker of surprise crossing his face. You would tie yourself to your enemy? He asked softly. Evelyn's throat tightened. Better a living enemy than a dead man's ghost. And just like that, the noose was lowered, the rope coiled away, and the gallows emptied. The crowd whispered and muttered, torn between outrage and disbelief. The condemned Apache was led away, not to a grave, but to the home of the sheriff's widow. As the sun finally broke over the desert, its light fell across them both, two strangers bound by law, by loss, and by something deeper neither could yet name. The dawn that should have seen death had instead given birth to a fate more dangerous. A marriage forged in fire and silence. The ink on the marriage papers was barely dry when the deputy shoved Taza toward Evelyn's house. His wrists still bound, his steps silent. The crowd trailed behind at a distance, their faces tight with suspicion and anger. Silver Mesa had never seen anything like it. The sheriff's widow saving the man accused of killing her husband. By the time they reached her home at the edge of town, the sun was dipping low behind the red cliffs. The house stood alone on the open prairie, a modest white structure with a sagging porch, flanked by a dying apple tree and a weathered barn. Once it had been a place of laughter and Sunday suppers. Now it looked like a ghost of its former self, much like the woman who owned it. The deputy spat in the dust and sneered. You'll regret this, Mrs. Carter, mark me. Then to Taza, step out of line, and you'll hang for real next time. He tossed the iron key into the dirt at her feet and rode away, leaving a trail of dust and bitter whispers behind. Evelyn stood in the doorway, her hands shaking as she unlocked his chains. The metal clattered to the floor. For a long moment neither spoke. The silence between them was heavy, alive with tension and something unnamed. "You're free to go," she said at last, her voice steady, though her heart raced. "But if you run, they'll hunt you down and kill you. If you stay, they'll call me mad. Either way, I suppose we're both prisoners." Taza rubbed his wrists, the skin beneath raw. "Why?" he asked simply. "Why save me?" Evelyn looked away, her gaze drifting to the horizon where the prairie melted into sky. "Because I've buried enough men already. And because something in your eyes told me you weren't lying." He studied her then, long and searching. His people had taught him that every face told a story. Hers was carved with grief and quiet courage, a woman who had lost faith in the world but not in herself. Inside, the house was neat but lifeless. The mantel still held her husband's picture, his sheriff's star gleaming in the lamplight. Taza's presence seemed to drain the warmth from the room. He stood apart, still and silent, his broad shoulders nearly brushing the ceiling. "I'll sleep in the barn," he said at last. "You'll sleep inside," she replied firmly. "The law says you're my husband now. I won't have the town thinking I've taken in a savage as a servant." The word hung between them, savage, and she winced as soon as she said it. He didn't flinch, but his eyes turned hard as obsidian. "Then I'll sleep by the door," he said flatly, and without waiting for her permission, he spread a blanket on the floor beside the hearth. That night, Evelyn lay awake in her bed, staring at the ceiling. She could hear him breathing in the next room, steady, controlled, like a heartbeat she wasn't meant to hear. Her thoughts chased themselves in circles. What had she done? She had saved a man everyone hated, defied the town that once pitied her, and tied herself to a stranger who had every reason to despise her. Yet, beneath the fear, there was something else. Curiosity. A pull she couldn't explain. The memory of his eyes beneath the gallows haunted her more than her husband's voice ever had. When the wind rose near midnight, rattling the shutters, she crept to the doorway and looked out. Taza sat upright by the dying fire, awake, watching the flames with the stillness of a predator. "You don't sleep?" she asked softly. "Sleep is for men who have peace," he replied. His words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. Evelyn nodded faintly and returned to her room, her heart unsteady. Outside, the prairie stretched wide and silver under the moonlight, whispering secrets through the grass. Inside, two lost souls shared the same roof, each bound by duty and something they didn't yet understand. And as the night deepened, the widow of the lawman and the warrior condemned by law began the first uneasy chapter of their shared fate, a bargain neither could escape, yet neither truly wanted to undo. The days that followed were long and wordless. The prairie outside Evelyn Carter's window seemed to stretch forever, silent and indifferent to the turmoil inside her house. A fine dust clung to everything, the floorboards, the dishes, even the air itself. It was as if the wind carried whispers of judgment from the town. Each morning she would rise before dawn, sweep the floors and fix breakfast, eggs, biscuits, black coffee. She always set 2 plates, though the second was usually left untouched. Taza sat at the table, his shoulders square and his expression unreadable. Sometimes he would take a piece of bread, most times he wouldn't. He never asked for anything, and she never offered twice. It wasn't fear that filled the silence. It was pride. Both carried it like armor. Evelyn was determined not to appear weak, and Taza refused to show gratitude. They were 2 halves of a broken truth, held together only by a law neither had chosen. On the 3rd day, she found him outside repairing the corral fence. The hammer struck rhythmically, sure and strong. She stopped a few yards away, shading her eyes against the sun. "You don't have to do that," she said. He didn't look up. "The boards were weak. It's not your job." He paused, then drove another nail. "It's my house too, isn't it?" The words startled her, not because they were wrong, but because they were true. She turned away before he could see the faint flush in her cheeks. Inside the house, her husband's picture still hung on the wall, watching everything. Sometimes Evelyn caught herself glancing at it, guilt tugging at her heart. The town worshipped John Carter as a hero, but she remembered the nights he came home with whiskey on his breath and secrets in his eyes. He had been kind once before ambition swallowed him whole. Now, with Taza's quiet presence filling the house, the silence no longer felt like mourning. It felt like waiting. That evening, as the sun bled into the horizon, a knock echoed on the door. Evelyn froze. Visitors were rare since her marriage to the Apache. When she opened it, she found Deputy Clay Bennett standing on the porch, his hat in his hand, a mocking smile curling his lips. "Evening, Mrs. Carter," he drawled. "Heard you and your new husband settling in fine." His eyes flicked over her shoulder toward Taza, who stood in the corner, arms folded. "Town's talking. Some folks say the law should have finished what it started." Evelyn stiffened. "If you came to threaten me, save your breath." Clay chuckled lowly. "Just making sure the widow's safe. You never know what a wild man might do in the night." Taza took one step forward, slow, deliberate. His gaze locked on the deputy, dark and cold. "Go," he said simply. The deputy's smirk faltered. "You best remember your place, savage," he spat before retreating down the steps. When he was gone, Evelyn turned to Taza. "You shouldn't have said that. They'll use it against you." "They already have," he replied. For a long moment they stared at each other, the air thick with unspoken truths. Then Evelyn sighed and moved to the stove, pouring herself a cup of coffee to steady her shaking hands. "You're making enemies," she muttered. Taza's voice was quiet, but certain. "I already have enemies. I'd rather make one more than bow to them." Something in his tone struck her, not arrogance, but conviction. It made her chest tighten in a way she couldn't name. She wanted to hate him for his pride, yet she found herself admiring it. That night, as she lay in bed, she listened to the steady creak of the rocking chair where he sat by the window, awake as always. The moonlight cut across his face, softening the hardness there. He looked more like a man than the savage they called him. Evelyn turned onto her side, her eyes drifting toward her late husband's watch glinting on the nightstand. She picked it up, listening to the ticking. It felt heavier than before. Each tick a reminder that time was moving forward, carrying her further away from the woman she had been. Outside, the wind moaned through the prairie grass like a restless spirit. Inside, two hearts beat out of rhythm, caught between defiance and something far more dangerous. And though they did not yet speak it, both Evelyn and Taza could feel it in the stillness of the house, a fragile peace that could break with a single breath. The wind that night came wild from the west, carrying the scent of rain and something darker, smoke. Evelyn woke first, a faint orange flicker spilling through her window like the breath of a waking beast. She threw on her shawl and ran to the porch, her heart pounding. Out beyond the barn, a line of fire danced across the prairie, growing taller with every gust. "Taza!" she called, her voice trembling. He was already outside, barefoot, shirtless, a bucket in one hand. His eyes glowed with the reflection of the flames. "The wind's shifting east," he said. "It'll reach the barn before dawn." Evelyn's mind raced. The barn held everything she owned: tools, feed, and the 2 horses she needed to survive. She grabbed another bucket and ran to the well, but Taza caught her wrist. "Too close," he warned. "The fire will turn quick. I won't let it take the horses," she snapped, pulling free. "That barn is all I have left." He met her eyes, stern, steady, and for a heartbeat neither moved. Then, without a word, he sprinted toward the barn. Evelyn cursed under her breath and followed. The heat hit them first, waves of it rolling through the night air. Sparks flew like fireflies as the flames crept through the tall grass. Taza threw open the barn doors and untied the horses, slapping their flanks to drive them toward the creek. Evelyn ran after them, coughing on the smoke. The prairie was alive with fire now, a roaring ocean of gold and red. Sparks caught in Evelyn's hair and she stumbled, choking. Taza turned back, caught her arm, and pulled her close. His hand was rough, his grip unyielding. "Stay low," he ordered. "Breathe slow." Together they dragged water from the troughs, dousing the outer walls. The wind howled, shifting the fire closer. When a beam cracked and fell, Evelyn screamed, thinking they'd lost the barn for sure. But Taza moved like a man born of the flames. He grabbed the fallen timber, muscles straining, and shoved it aside. She saw then, not the prisoner the town had condemned, but the warrior the desert itself had shaped. Smoke swirled around him, sweat and soot painting his skin like war paint. When the last of the fire broke against the wet soil, the night fell into silence again. The barn still stood, blackened but alive. The horses were safe by the creek, trembling but untouched. Evelyn leaned against the fence, breathing hard, her hair tangled and her face streaked with ash. Taza stood beside her, chest heaving, eyes fixed on the horizon where embers glowed like fallen stars. "You should have let it burn," he said quietly. She looked at him, half laughing, half weeping. "And let them win? This land is mine. It's all I have left." He turned toward her then, close enough that she could feel the heat still radiating from his skin. "Land doesn't belong to anyone," he said softly. "We only borrow it." Evelyn met his gaze, something fierce rising in her chest. "Then let me borrow it long enough to keep breathing." The words hung between them, fragile and alive. The wind shifted again, cool now, brushing against them like a sigh of relief. Their eyes met, his dark and unyielding, hers burning with a stubborn fire. For the first time since the gallows, Evelyn didn't see an enemy. She saw a man standing between her and ruin. And for the first time, Taza didn't see the widow of a lawman. He saw a woman who refused to break even when the world tried to turn her to ash. When the last of the flames died down, they stood together beneath the open sky. The stars shimmered faintly above the smoke, and in the distance coyotes sang to the dawn. Evelyn shivered, though the air was warm, and without thinking, Taza reached for her hand. It was a simple touch, rough skin against soft. But the spark it carried was more dangerous than the fire they had just survived. For a moment, neither pulled away. The prairie, blackened and smoldering, smelled of smoke and new beginnings. And in that quiet aftermath, Evelyn Carter realized that the man she had once feared might be the only soul left who could make her feel alive again. The morning after the fire, Silver Mesa was humming with gossip. From the saloon to the general store, tongues wagged about how the sheriff's widow and her savage husband had stood side by side in the flames. Some said he'd bewitched her. Others whispered that the fire had been God's warning. Evelyn didn't care. For the first time in months, she felt alive, bone-tired but alive. She found Taza in the barn repairing the burnt section of the roof. The smell of smoke still lingered in the air, mingling with the scent of hay and horses. He worked silently, his movements efficient and sure. The light from the open door glowed along his shoulders, turning sweat to gold. Evelyn watched from the threshold for a moment before speaking. "You didn't have to stay and fight that fire," she said quietly. "You could have run. No one would have stopped you." Taza looked down from the rafters, his expression unreadable. "You didn't run either." Their eyes met, and for a breath, neither looked away. Then Evelyn turned, breaking the spell. "Breakfast is ready," she said. "If you want it," over coffee and cornbread. Silence sat between them again, though softer now, less like a wall, more like a bridge neither dared cross. Later that day, Evelyn went to the old sheriff's study. She hadn't stepped foot inside since John's funeral. Dust covered the desk and the curtains were drawn tight, shutting out the sun. His coat still hung on the wall, the badge pinned to the breast. For a long moment, she simply stood there staring at it. When she finally opened the desk drawers, she wasn't sure what she was looking for, only that she couldn't go on pretending her husband had been the man the town remembered. Letters spilled from the top drawer, tied in twine, receipts to ones she didn't recognize. She unfolded them one by one, shipments of rifles, gunpowder, and liquor, all signed in her husband's hand. The names beside them belonged to men she knew, ranchers, traders, even the deputy. And scrawled in the margins of one letter, a name she didn't expect to see at all: Taza Blackhawk. Her blood ran cold. She read the letter twice before the truth struck like a blow. Her husband had been selling arms to the same outlaws who raided the Apache camps and then betrayed them for profit. The massacre that followed had not been justice. It had been greed. She sank into the chair, the paper trembling in her hands. For the first time, she saw her husband not as a fallen hero, but as the man who had doomed Taza's people, and perhaps brought his own death upon himself. The door creaked softly behind her. Taza stood there, silent. He looked at the papers in her lap, then at her face. He didn't ask how she'd found them. He didn't need to. "So it's true," she whispered. He nodded once. "Your husband made promises to my tribe. He said he would trade peace for land. Instead, he sent men in the night. They burned our camp, took what they wanted. We fought back. He died in that fight." Evelyn's throat ached. "Why didn't you tell me before?" "Would you have listened?" he asked quietly. She couldn't answer. He stepped closer, his voice low but calm. You think I hate you for being his wife, but I don't. You didn't ride with him that night." Evelyn's hands shook as she gathered the letters into a pile. "The town worships him. If they knew, they'd still call me a murderer," Taza said. "Truth means nothing when hate feeds a man's pride." Evelyn looked up at him, tears stinging her eyes. "Then what am I supposed to do with this truth?" "Carry it," he said simply. "But don't let it bury you." For the first time, she saw the weight he carried, not rage, but sorrow too deep to name. She wanted to say something, an apology, perhaps, but the words caught in her throat. When he turned to leave, she called softly, "Taza." He paused at the doorway. "I believe you," she said. He inclined his head, a faint flicker of gratitude crossing his features. Then he stepped into the sunlight, leaving her alone with the ghosts of her past and the truth she could no longer unsee. Outside, the wind swept across the prairie, scattering ash and secrets alike. And somewhere deep inside her chest, Evelyn Carter felt the first crack in the wall she had built around her heart. The storm rolled in from the mountains at dusk, low, dark, and heavy with rain. The wind pressed against the windows like a restless spirit, and thunder growled across the prairie. Evelyn stood at the kitchen table, the letters from her husband's study spread before her. The candlelight trembled with every gust. She had read them all twice now, her mind numb. The truth refused to settle. It gnawed at her, whispering that the man she had mourned was no hero but a liar and a traitor. The man she had condemned, Taza, had been fighting for his home, his family, his people. A crack of thunder shook the walls. The door flew open and Taza entered, drenched and wild-eyed. "The horses are secured," he said, brushing rain from his hair. "The wind will break soon." She nodded numbly. "You shouldn't have gone out." He shrugged, water dripping from his shoulders. Storms don't ask permission. For a while, neither spoke. The air between them was thick, alive with the storm's energy and the weight of what they both now knew. Evelyn turned toward him, her hands trembling over the scattered papers. "I found everything," she said softly. "Every lie. Every deal." Taza's gaze flicked toward the desk, then back to her. "You know now what your husband was," she swallowed hard. "And what I was blind to." Lightning flashed, illuminating the room in white light. In that brief, fierce glow, she saw the raw honesty in his face, the pain he'd carried, the scars both seen and unseen. "I was raised to believe men like you were savages," she whispered. "But the only savage thing I've seen is what my husband did to your people." Taza said nothing. The silence stretched, filled with the drum of rain on the roof and the steady thrum of thunder. She stepped closer, her breath shallow. "You should hate me for his name, but you don't." "I hate no one who walks in truth," he said quietly. "Only those who hide behind lies." The words struck deep. She felt something inside her loosen, something that had been held too tightly for too long. "Then what am I, Taza?" she asked, her voice trembling. "A widow of lies? A fool who saved the wrong man?" He shook his head slowly. "You saved the right one." The storm outside broke fully then, a sudden downpour pounding the roof. Evelyn turned toward the window, watching lightning claw across the sky. "Everything I believed in is gone," she said, her voice breaking. "The law, the town, my husband, all of it." Taza stepped closer, his presence grounding her amid the chaos. "Then stop believing in them," he said. "Believe in what's here." When she turned, he was inches away. His breath mingled with hers, warm despite the cold air. For a heartbeat, neither moved. Rain streaked the window. Thunder rolled like distant drums, and the world outside vanished. Evelyn's hands trembled as she reached up, brushing a strand of wet hair from his face. His skin was warm, his eyes burning with something fierce and unspoken. "Tell me why I'm not afraid of you anymore," she whispered. "Because you finally see me," he said. Then he kissed her. It wasn't gentle. It was fire meeting rain, raw, desperate, and real. The kiss burned through every barrier, every lie, every scar they carried. She felt the ache of it in her chest, in her hands, in the spaces she thought had gone numb. When he pulled back, the air between them sizzled, alive with everything they couldn't say. Outside, the storm howled and lashed the world clean. Inside, the widow and the warrior stood in its wake, changed. Evelyn drew a shaky breath. "This can't happen," she whispered. "It already has," Taza replied softly. Thunder cracked again, closer this time, shaking the floorboards. Evelyn turned away, pressing a hand to her lips as if to trap the warmth still lingering there. Taza stepped back, giving her space, his expression unreadable. Through the window, lightning lit the prairie in flashes, wild, beautiful, and alive. The world outside was chaos, but for the first time Evelyn felt clarity. The truth had burned her clean, and in the ashes something new had begun. She turned back to Taza, her voice barely a whisper. "The storm's passing." He met her eyes. "No," he said. "It's just begun." And in that moment, as the thunder rolled over the silent prairie, Evelyn knew he was right. By morning, the storm had passed, leaving Silver Mesa washed clean and quiet. But peace didn't last long out here, not when gossip rode faster than any horse. By noon, the town was already buzzing. The widow's light had been seen burning through the night, and someone claimed they'd spotted the Apache in her doorway when the storm broke. That was all it took. Words twisted, spread, and soured like milk left in the sun. When Evelyn went into town to buy flour and kerosene, the air turned colder than the wind. The blacksmith stopped hammering mid-swing. Mrs. Dalton, who had once brought her soup after the funeral, turned her back and pretended not to see her. Children were called indoors. She walked straight and proud down Main Street, though her heart was beating fast. She could feel their eyes on her, judging, condemning. Every step echoed like a challenge. At the general store, the owner, Mr. Graves, hesitated before weighing her flour. "Folks are saying strange things, Mrs. Carter," he said carefully. "That you've taken that Apache into your house is more than just a husband in name." Evelyn's voice was steady, though her hands trembled. "Folks will say anything when they run out of sense." Mr. Graves looked uncomfortable. "It's not me judging, ma'am, but Deputy Bennett's been stirring up talk. Says he's got reason to believe Taza's planning something, that maybe he's gathering his kind again." Evelyn's eyes flashed. "And you believe him?" Graves sighed. "I believe a widow like you ought to be careful who she stands beside." She gathered her things without another word and walked out, her head held high. But as she passed the saloon, she caught sight of Clay Bennett himself leaning against a post, his grin sharp and cruel. "Well now," he drawled, "if it isn't the bride of the gallows." Evelyn stopped cold. "If you've got something to say, Clay, say it plain." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "You think you can play house with that redskin and no one'll notice? You're making a fool of yourself, and worse, a traitor. The town's patience won't hold forever." Her pulse thudded in her ears. "You don't know a thing about what happens in my house." "Oh, I know plenty," he sneered. "You're letting a killer sleep under your roof, maybe even in your bed." Before she could speak, he tipped his hat mockingly. "If the law won't finish the job, maybe the town will." He turned and strode away, spurs clinking, leaving her shaking with rage. By the time she returned home, dusk was falling and her breath came ragged with fury. She found Taza chopping wood behind the house, his bare arms gleaming with sweat. "They're coming for you," she said without preamble. "Bennett's turning them against us." Taza stopped mid-swing, his eyes calm but knowing. He was waiting for this. Evelyn stepped closer. "You can't stay here. They'll hang you, law or no law." "I won't run," he said. "Running only makes a man pray." She stared at him, frustration and fear twisting inside her. "You don't understand. This town, these people, they're not like you. They'll come with guns." He set the axe down, the muscles in his jaw tightening. "Then let them come." Evelyn's breath caught. "You'll die." "Better that," he said quietly. "Then bow again to men who think themselves gods." Her anger broke then, not at him, but at the world. "You're both the same," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Him and you fighting to the death just to prove who's right." Taza's gaze softened. "No, I fight only to live free." Something in his tone silenced her. He stepped closer, his presence filling the space between them. "You should go," he said. "Take what you need. Leave before the fire returns." Evelyn's throat ached, but she lifted her chin. "I'm not leaving." Their eyes locked, hers fierce, his unyielding. A storm passed between them, silent and charged. "You don't owe me your fight," he said. "Maybe not," she replied, "but you don't owe me your protection either." Yet here we are. A flicker of emotion crossed his face. Respect, perhaps, or something deeper. The wind rose again, carrying the faint echo of distant hooves. The night ahead would not be quiet. Evelyn turned toward the dark horizon, her voice low. "If they want a fight, then we'll give them one." Taza nodded once, the faintest ghost of a smile touching his lips. "Then we stand together." And as the last light faded from the sky, the widow and the warrior prepared for the storm that was coming, not of rain this time, but of men and hate. Night fell like a shroud over Silver Mesa. The prairie lay still, but in the distance came the faint drumming of hooves, the sound of men gathering. Evelyn stood at the window, lantern light flickering over her pale face. "They're coming," she whispered. Taza already knew. He had been listening for an hour, his head tilted to the wind, every sense alert. 5 horses, he said. Maybe 6. Bennett's leading them. Evelyn turned sharply. "Then we go now," he hesitated. "If we run, they'll call it proof of guilt. If we stay, they'll call it justice," she snapped. "Either way, they've already decided." For a heartbeat, their eyes met. Hers fierce, his calm, and that was enough. He nodded once, grabbed his rifle, and started for the barn. Evelyn snatched her husband's old saddlebag, stuffing it with food, a few coins, and the letters that had damned him. Outside, the prairie stretched endless and black, lit only by a silver crescent of moon. The horses whinnied softly as Taza saddled them with steady hands. "Ride light," he said. "We'll follow the river south. The canyon will hide our trail." As they mounted, the first gunshot cracked in the distance. The sound tore through the stillness like thunder. Evelyn's heart lurched. "Go!" Taza barked, spurring his horse forward. They galloped into the darkness, wind slapping their faces, hooves pounding the earth. Behind them, faint shouts rose, men's voices angry and eager. Evelyn dared not look back. The prairie became a blur of moonlight and shadow, the scent of sage and smoke in the air. They rode hard for an hour before slowing near the riverbank. The water glimmered faintly, whispering over the stones. Evelyn's chest heaved, her dress torn and spattered with dust. Taza dismounted, scanning the horizon. "We rest here," he said. Evelyn slid from her saddle, her legs trembling. "You think they'll follow this far?" "They'll follow until they can't," he replied. "Men like Bennett don't stop until they've proved themselves stronger." She sank onto the ground, wrapping her arms around her knees. The night was cold, and every sound seemed sharper. The cry of an owl, the rustle of grass. "You've done this before," she murmured. Taza nodded. "Too many times. Always running. Always hunted." Evelyn looked at him then, really looked. The firelight from his small camp flickered across his face. Strong, scarred, proud. "You could leave me," she said quietly. "Go where they'll never find you." He met her gaze, his voice low. "And let them kill you for saving me?" "No," she swallowed hard, her throat tight. "Then what are we now, Taza?" "Fugitive and outlaw, widow and savage." He considered her words, then said softly, "2 people the world doesn't want. That makes us the same." The truth in that simple sentence struck her like lightning. She turned away, blinking against the tears that came unbidden. The wind shifted, carrying the faint smell of rain and gunpowder. Taza moved closer to the fire, feeding it a handful of dry grass. "Sleep," he said gently. "I'll keep watch." But she couldn't sleep. Her mind spun with all she'd lost. Her home, her name, the fragile peace she'd built from lies. And yet, sitting there beside him, she felt a strange sense of safety, as if the chaos of the world had finally found its match. Hours passed. The night deepened. Taza's silhouette stood tall against the firelight, his gaze fixed on the horizon. Evelyn rose quietly and approached him. "You'll drive yourself mad staring into the dark," she said softly. He glanced down at her, a faint smile ghosting his lips. "Darkness doesn't scare me. It's the light that blinds." Evelyn stepped closer. "Then I'll keep the fire low." For a long moment they stood in silence, the river whispering at their feet. The distance between them felt like nothing at all. She wanted to reach out, to touch his arm, to tell him she trusted him completely. But before she could, the sound of hooves thundered faintly across the plain once more. Taza's eyes hardened. "They found us." He doused the fire with a swift kick, plunging them into darkness. "Ride south," he said. "No stops this time." Evelyn mounted her horse, the fear returning, but this time, it didn't control her. As they rode beneath the moon, side by side, she glanced once at Taza. His jaw was set, his eyes forward, every inch the warrior. And for the first time, she realized something startling. She wasn't running from her old life anymore. She was riding towards something new. The first light of dawn bled across the horizon, pale and cold. Taza and Evelyn had ridden through the night, their horses spent, their bodies aching. The river had led them into the lowlands, a stretch of rolling plains broken by rocks and tall grass. Taza slowed his horse at a narrow ravine, raising a hand for silence. Evelyn obeyed, her heart still pounding from the flight. The morning was eerily still. Only the sound of the river and the cry of distant hawks filled the air. "They'll be close," Taza murmured. "Bennett knows these lands." Evelyn's eyes flicked toward the ridgeline. "Then we keep moving." He shook his head. "No, the horses can't take more. We make our stand here." Her breath caught. "A stand? You mean fight them?" He met her gaze steadily. "If we run any farther, we'll die tired. Better to face them where the earth gives us cover." She swallowed, nodding despite the fear rising in her chest. There was no logic in it, only faith. Faith in him, in his certainty. They tethered the horses behind a fallen log and took shelter among the rocks. Taza crouched low, scanning the ridge. His senses sharpened. Every sound, every shadow told a story. After a few tense minutes, Evelyn heard it too. The low rumble of hooves drawing closer. Taza loaded his rifle with calm precision. "When they come, stay low," he said. "Don't move unless I tell you." Evelyn picked up her husband's revolver. It felt heavy and foreign in her hand. "I'm not hiding," she said. He gave her a quick, hard look. "This isn't your fight." "Yes, it is," she whispered. "It became mine the moment they called you a monster and me a whore." Something in his expression softened. Admiration, sorrow, perhaps both. He nodded once. "Then fight beside me." Moments later, 6 riders appeared over the ridge, their silhouettes black against the dawn. Bennett rode at the front, his rifle slung low, his grin cruel and certain. "Well, look what the storm dragged out," he called. "The savage and his bride." Evelyn stood beside Taza, her jaw set. "Go home, Bennett," she said. "There's been enough blood." "Not near enough," he spat. "You shamed this town, woman." "And you," he said, pointing at Taza. "You should have stayed in your hole." Taza raised his rifle. "Leave now. I'll give no warning after this." Bennett laughed, a hard, sharp sound, and spurred his horse forward. The first shot rang out. Dust exploded from a nearby rock. Taza fired back, dropping one of the riders. Chaos erupted. Gunfire cracked through the morning air, echoing across the ravine. Evelyn ducked, returning fire with trembling hands. Taza moved like a shadow, calm, precise, deadly. He fired, reloaded, fired again. 2 more men fell. But Bennett pressed on, his fury blind and burning. A shot grazed Taza's arm, spinning him to the side. Evelyn cried out, rushing to his aid. "You're hit!" "Just a scratch," he hissed, gritting his teeth. "Stay down!" She ignored him, firing again. Her bullet struck Bennett's shoulder, knocking him from his saddle. He hit the ground hard, cursing. The remaining rider fled, fear overtaking loyalty. The prairie fell quiet, except for the echo of gunfire and the heavy panting of the horses. Evelyn turned to Taza, her breath ragged. "It's over," she whispered. But Taza was already walking toward Bennett, who lay bleeding in the dirt, clutching his arm. "Go ahead," the deputy sneered. "Finish it. Prove them right." Taza stood over him, rifle steady. For a long moment, the only sound was the wind. Then slowly he lowered the weapon. "No," he said quietly. "You're not worth another death." Bennett spat blood, glaring up at him. "You think this changes anything?" Taza met his gaze, unflinching. "It changes me." He turned away, leaving the man to his shame. Evelyn watched, awe softening her fear. "You spared him," she said softly. Taza looked toward the horizon, the morning sun rising behind him. "Killing him would have been easy," he said. "But mercy, that's the harder path." Evelyn stepped closer, touching his arm where the blood had dried. "And the braver one," she said. For a long moment they stood together in the golden light, the wind sweeping the plains clean. The prairie that had known only silence and sorrow now carried the sound of something new. Peace, fragile but real. Taza turned to her, his voice low. "You can go back now. The law will have its story. You saved yourself," but Evelyn shook her head. "I didn't come this far to go back. Wherever you go next, that's where I'll be." He stared at her, uncertain, almost afraid to believe. Then slowly a faint smile touched his lips. "Then we ride east," he said. "Where the land is free and no one remembers the names of the dead." She nodded. "Then east it is." Together they mounted their horses. Behind them, Silver Mesa smoldered in the distance, a place they had both outgrown. Ahead stretched endless sky, sunlight breaking through the clouds. The widow and the warrior rode on. their shadows long across the morning plain, two souls reborn from the ashes of hate. Days turned into weeks as they rode east, following the rising sun. The prairie stretched endless in gold before them, a living ocean of wind and grass. Behind them, Silver Mesa faded into memory, a ghost town haunted by its own bitterness. Ahead lay the unknown, and for the first time Evelyn didn't fear it. They camped along rivers under cottonwoods and beneath skies so wide it seemed heaven itself had cracked open. Sometimes they rode in silence. Sometimes they spoke of things neither had dared to before: loss, loneliness, and the strange kind of freedom that came from having nothing left to lose. One evening, as the sun dipped low, they found a ridge overlooking a valley green and alive with wildflowers. The air smelled of rain and sage. Evelyn dismounted, her skirts brushing the grass. "It's beautiful," she said softly. Taza studied the horizon, his dark eyes steady. "My people once called this land sacred," he said. "Before it was taken." Evelyn turned toward him. "Then maybe it's time someone gave it back." He looked at her, a faint smile ghosting his lips. "You'd live here? Away from towns, from people?" "I've lived among people all my life," she said, "and never felt at home here. Maybe I could." Taza said nothing for a while, only listening to the wind moving through the grass. "This land doesn't forgive easily," he said at last. "It takes in tests. It remembers blood. So do I," she murmured. "But I'm still here." They built a small fire, and as night fell, the stars came out, thousands of them scattered like silver dust. The quiet between them was no longer awkward but warm, familiar. Evelyn watched the flames dance, then said softly, "Do you ever think about what might have been, if things had been different?" Taza's gaze stayed on the stars. "Sometimes. But the past is like a river, you can't walk it twice. You can only follow where it leads," she smiled faintly. "And where has it led you, Taza?" He turned to her then, his eyes reflecting the firelight. "Here, to you," her breath caught. For a long moment the world seemed to still, the crackle of fire, the sigh of the wind, the hum of life all around them. Evelyn reached across the space between them and touched his hand. His skin was warm, rough, alive. "I used to believe love was something gentle," she said quietly, "like a hymn. But this feels like thunder and fire and everything I was afraid to feel." Taza's fingers curled around hers, steady and sure. "Love isn't gentle," he said. "It's the only thing strong enough to break what's broken." A soft wind rose, carrying the scent of wildflowers. Evelyn leaned closer, her head resting against his shoulder. For the first time in years, her heart felt unburdened. Not by what she'd lost, but by what she'd finally found. They stayed like that until the fire burned low and the stars began to fade. Somewhere beyond the hills, the first light of dawn began to touch the sky. When morning came, they worked together, cutting grass for the horses, collecting water, planning to build a shelter. Evelyn laughed when Taza showed her how to set a snare, her hands clumsy but eager. "You're not half bad," he said, smiling in that rare way that reached his eyes. "I learn fast," she teased, "especially when my teacher scowls less." By midday they stood together on the ridge again, the wind tugging at their clothes. The land spread wide beneath them, green and endless. "This place will remember us," Evelyn said quietly. Taza looked at her, the prairie sun catching in his eyes. "Then we'll give it something worth remembering." He reached for her hand. She took it without hesitation. Together they faced the horizon, the widow and the warrior, bound not by law or fear but by choice. Below them, the grass bent and shimmered like waves, whispering secrets to the wind. Evelyn closed her eyes and listened, for the first time since her husband's death, since her forced marriage, since the world had burned and broken around her. She heard something new in the silence. Peace. The prairie stretched on forever, but the loneliness was gone. And when Taza turned toward her, brushing a strand of hair from her face, the soft warmth of his touch told her what words never could, that the fire between them had not destroyed, but reborn them both. As the sun rose higher, their shadows joined in the grass, long and unbroken. The silent prairie, once marked by blood and grief, now held the echo of their laughter and a promise that love, even when forged from ruin, could still light the world aflame.